Hey guys, tonight we walk straight out into a medieval winter evening, the kind where the sky turns a dull iron color long before you're ready to stop working, and the cold sneaks up your sleeves like it pays rent there. You're a peasant, which means sunset is less golden hour and more, we need a plan. Your boots crunch over frozen ground, your breath fogs the air, and the last bit of daylight drains away as if someone unplugged it. This is the hour when survival quietly shifts from daylight labor to enduring the night. You can still hear distant church bells, muffled by cold air, and somewhere a dog barks, then thinks better of it and goes quiet. You probably won't survive this, at least not comfortably, and definitely not without some creative problem solving. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're settling in, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. It's always wild to see who's listening while the rest of the world sleeps. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a medieval village, watching smoke rise low and lazy from thatched roofs. The cold hits differently at night. During the day, movement keeps you warm, but now your body slows and the temperature drops like a bad surprise you should have seen coming. One mainstream historical fact slips quietly into your awareness. Medieval peasants in much of Europe lived without chimneys until the late Middle Ages, relying instead on central hearth fires with smoke drifting out through roof gaps. Cozy concept, questionable execution. Your eyes sting just thinking about it. You step inside your home before full dark. It's small, maybe one room, the walls made of wattle and daub, sticks woven together and packed with mud and straw. Not exactly luxury real estate, but the thick walls actually help trap heat, even if they smell faintly of damp earth. Historians still argue whether peasants consciously understood insulation in a scientific way or simply repeated building styles that worked because people who built worse houses froze and didn't pass on their plans. Either way, you're grateful for every inch of thick wall as the cold creeps in. The village grows quieter now. Night in medieval times isn't something you stroll through casually. Without streetlights or reliable candles for everyone, darkness feels heavier, thicker, like something that might bump into you. And winter nights are long, really long. In January, you could be facing 14 or more hours of darkness. That's a lot of time to stay warm, fed, and vaguely alive. No scrolling on your phone, no just one more episode. Just time. So much time. You feel the weight of it settling in as you secure the door. Doors are simple, often wooden planks, sometimes with gaps wide enough to let in wind if you don't shove a rag into the crack. This is not paranoia, this is draft management. One quirky tidbit from the period, some peasants believed cold winds carried illness and malevolent forces, so blocking drafts wasn't just practical, it was spiritual home security. Think of it as medieval antivirus software. It may or may not work, but it gives peace of mind. As darkness fully settles, the sounds outside change. Daytime life, tools, voices, animals, fades into distant, occasional noises. An owl, wind in bare branches. That unsettling silence that makes you suddenly aware of every ache in your joints. You rub your hands together, already thinking about the fire. Fire is everything now. Not dramatic, just true. Lose the fire, lose the night. It's like forgetting your phone charger on a long trip, except the battery is your body temperature. The cold medieval night isn't always brutally freezing, depending on the region, but inside your house the temperature can drop close to outside levels if the fire goes out. Archaeological evidence suggests many peasant homes hovered only a few degrees warmer than the outdoors overnight. If that doesn't make you want to hug your thermostat, nothing will. Joke number one, suddenly your modern complaint about "it's cold in here at 68 degrees" feels deeply unserious. You move slowly now, conserving energy. Food has already been eaten earlier, because digestion itself helps warm you. You can feel the dense bread sitting heavy in your stomach, doing its quiet metabolic work like a tiny internal space heater. You didn't call it that, of course. You just know that going to bed hungry in winter is a terrible idea. Your grandparents told you this. Their grandparents told them the same thing. Oral tradition sometimes beats written records when fingers get numb holding a pen. Outside, frost starts to form. If you step back out, it crunches underfoot, each sound sharper than during the day. That cold clarity makes everything feel exposed. It's one of the reasons medieval villages cluster close together. Community isn't just social, it's thermal. Houses block wind for one another, bodies share heat, and the village itself becomes a slightly warmer bubble in a hostile landscape. Historians still argue whether this clustering was more about defense or climate adaptation. But tonight, you don't care. Warm is warm. You pause by the hearth, watching embers glow like low red eyes. The fire is alive, in a way. It needs feeding, attention, respect. You bank it carefully, adding just enough fuel to last, but not so much that it burns too hot and fast. Smoke curls upward, stinging your nose. You blink, already drowsy, already used to it. One light joke slips in here. At least mosquitoes are a non-issue in winter. You can't have everything. As the night deepens, you sense that this is the real threshold, the moment between day's labor and the long endurance test ahead. You're not thinking in big, dramatic terms. You're thinking about fingers, toes, the fire, the roof. Survival isn't heroic. It's practical and repetitive and a little boring, which honestly is exactly why it works. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you carry a faint reassurance. People have done this before you. Thousands, millions. They survived cold nights without central heating, without electric blankets, without complaining to customer service. You smile faintly at that thought. Joke number 2. You'd still leave a very stern medieval Yelp review if you could. You settle in as the village fully sleeps, knowing this is just the first night, just the opening movement of a long winter symphony. The strategies will come, the routines will repeat, but first you let yourself feel the cold, acknowledge it, and prepare to endure it. Slowly, patiently, one ember at a time. You remain indoors now, letting the door settle back into its place with a dull wooden sigh, and once it's closed, you immediately feel the difference. It's slight, subtle, maybe only a few degrees, but in a medieval winter, that tiny improvement feels like winning a prize. This is the home you rely on to make the cold survivable, and every inch of it is shaped by that single goal. Comfort is optional, warmth is non-negotiable. You look around the space. The room isn't large, because large rooms waste heat, and peasants don't have extra warmth to waste. The low ceiling presses downward, almost cozy if you don't think too hard about the smoke stains. Heat rises, and medieval builders, maybe knowingly, maybe through generations of trial and error, kept ceilings low so warmth stayed where bodies were. One mainstream historical fact settles in here. Most medieval peasant houses used wattle and daub construction, with walls made of woven wooden strips packed with mud, clay, straw, and animal dung. Not glamorous, but effective. Dung is surprisingly good at insulating. And yes, this knowledge may permanently change how you feel about drywall. The walls feel thick when you stand near them. Mud doesn't just block wind, it absorbs heat from the fire during the evening and releases it slowly overnight. It's a primitive version of thermal mass, though you'd never call it that. You'd just know from experience that houses like this feel warmer than flimsy wooden huts. Historians still argue whether early medieval builders consciously understood heat retention or simply copied techniques that had proven survivable. But either way, your fingertips are grateful tonight. There's only one main room, and that's intentional. Separate bedrooms would mean more walls, more doors, more places for heat to escape. Privacy loses the argument to survival every single time. Everyone sleeps where the warmth is, even if that means listening to snoring that could legally qualify as a nighttime disturbance. Joke number 1 sneaks in gently. Medieval peasants didn't need white noise machines. Uncle whatever his name's breathing handled that just fine. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth. No insulation below, just soil that stays cold all winter. Some houses scatter straw or rushes across it, not just for cleanliness, but as a barrier against the chill creeping upward. You shuffle your feet, feeling how cold seeps through thin soles. This is why benches, stools, and beds are raised slightly. Elevation equals warmth. Even a few inches make a difference when cold air settles low like invisible fog. The roof above you plays its own role. Thatched roofs, bundles of straw or reeds layered thickly, aren't fireproof, unfortunately, but they are excellent insulators. Snow sometimes sits on them like a blanket, and oddly enough, that helps keep heat in. The heavier the snow, the better the insulation, as long as the roof doesn't collapse. It's a risky system, but winter is full of trade-offs. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some peasants believed a thickly thatched roof confused cold spirits, trapping them outside. Science and superstition often share the same workspace when temperatures drop. Light is minimal. Candles are precious, so you rely on the fire's glow. Less light means fewer openings in the walls. Windows, when they exist at all, are tiny, sometimes nothing more than shuttered holes. Glass is rare and expensive. Openings mean drafts, and drafts mean cold fingers at 3 in the morning. You mentally thank whoever decided darkness was preferable to frostbite. Joke number 2, medieval minimalism wasn't a design trend, it was a heat retention strategy. You sit near the hearth, feeling uneven warmth on your face while your back stays cool. The fire pit sits at the center or slightly off-center of the room so that heat spreads evenly. Chimneys aren't common yet, so smoke escapes through the roof or a high opening near the rafters. It sounds terrible, and sometimes it is, but smoke also helps preserve roof timbers by keeping insects away, another unintentional bonus. Medieval housing often solves 3 problems at once, none of them elegantly. Historians still argue whether smoke-filled interiors caused long-term health problems or whether bodies simply adapted over generations. Skeletal evidence suggests shorter life expectancy, but winter cold probably played a role too. Tonight, you're less worried about lungs and more focused on toes. You notice the way the house is positioned. Entrances don't face prevailing winter winds if they can help it. Villages grow organically, but they're shaped by climate as much as by tradition. Buildings huddle together, sharing walls when possible. These shared walls are warmer, protected from wind, and cheaper to build. Community again doubles as insulation. It's not just friendly, it's practical. You think about maintenance now, because warmth leaks from neglected homes. Cracks in the daub get patched constantly. This is year-round work, but winter reveals every flaw. Cold air is honest. It finds weakness instantly. Peasants often reapply mud layers annually, sometimes mixing in hair, straw, or dung for strength. It's messy work, but fresh walls mean warmer nights. And yes, your hands would smell like barnyard afterward. Joke number 3. Medieval home improvement shows were probably just people staring sadly at cracks while holding mud. The sense of enclosure brings a strange calm. Outside, winter is vast and indifferent. Inside, the world shrinks to a manageable space you can heat, maintain, and understand. This psychological warmth matters almost as much as physical heat. You know every sound this house makes. You can tell the difference between settling beams and problematic creaks. Familiarity is comforting when the night is long. As the hours creep forward, you settle deeper into the rhythm of the home. The walls do their slow work, holding heat, releasing it back into the room bit by bit. It's not enough to make you forget the season, but it's enough to make sleep possible. And that's the real victory here. Not comfort, not luxury, just the ability to rest without shivering yourself awake every few minutes. The house stands quietly around you, humble and unadorned, yet surprisingly clever. It's not designed to impress anyone. It's designed to get you through the night. And in medieval winter, that's more than enough. You turn your attention fully to the hearth now, because this small, glowing patch of firelight is the center of your entire night. Without it, the house is just a wooden box waiting to become an ice chest. Fire isn't about comfort here, it's about control. You learn early that letting the flames roar is a mistake. Burn too bright and you'll run out of fuel long before dawn. Let them die completely, and restarting a fire in the deep of night, with stiff fingers and half-asleep frustration, is something you try very hard to avoid. The trick is embers. Glowing, patient embers. Medieval peasants master this skill the same way people today master setting multiple alarms, through hard experience and regret. One mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. In many medieval homes, fires were kept going continuously through winter months, sometimes for weeks at a time, because relighting them was difficult without matches. Sparks were precious, and fire-starting tools took effort, coordination, and time. Time is exactly what you don't want to lose at 3 in the morning while your breath fogs the dark. You poke the fire carefully with a stick, rearranging the coals so they glow but don't flare. You add a thicker log, not too dry, so it burns slowly. Peat, when available, is even better. It smolders for hours, giving steady heat and minimal flame. It smells earthy and slightly sweet, and it clings to everything. If you've ever tried to get campfire smoke out of your clothes, imagine that, but permanent. This is why medieval people often smelled smoky. It's not a hygiene failure, it's a heating strategy. The hearth itself is simple. A shallow pit or stone-lined area on the floor. No fancy grate, no cast iron. Just stone that absorbs heat during the evening and releases it back overnight. Thermal mass again, doing its quiet, helpful work. Historians still argue whether hearth placement varied regionally based on climate or cultural tradition, but everywhere, the fire ends up where people sleep closest. You don't sleep far from your heat source. That's non-negotiable. As the fire settles into a slow burn, smoke thickens slightly, hanging in the air before finding its way out through the roof. Your eyes water a bit, and you shift your position to avoid the worst of it. Over time, people learned where to sit, where to sleep, how to angle themselves. There's an art to not choking while staying warm. One quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Some medieval households believed smoke drove away evil spirits at night. Whether or not that's true, it definitely drives away insects, and possibly guests who complain too much. You crouch and blow gently when the embers dim, not too hard, just enough to wake them. Fire responds like a living thing. It breathes when you breathe. This intimate relationship is oddly calming, even as it demands attention. You know you'll wake at least once during the night just to check it. That's normal. Interrupted sleep is part of the medieval experience. Joke number 1 slides in softly. This is the original checking your phone at 3 a.m., except your notifications are glowing coals. Fuel management occupies more of your mind than you'd expect. Wood gathered earlier needs to last the night and still leave enough for morning. Wet wood smokes too much and burns poorly. Too dry and it flashes away. You've stacked logs carefully, larger ones reserved for overnight, smaller kindlings saved for emergencies. This isn't hoarding, it's foresight. Winter punishes optimism. You listen to the sounds the fire makes. The soft crackle, the low hiss when moisture escapes, the occasional pop that makes you flinch, even though you know it's harmless. Outside, the wind rises and falls, but inside, the fire answers it, pushing warmth outward. The house becomes a pocket of tolerable air surrounded by cold. That contrast is sharp enough to feel with your skin. There's risk here too. Fires can escape. Thatched roofs burn fast, and villages have been lost overnight. Everyone knows someone, or knows someone who knew someone whose home burned down in winter. It's a constant calculation. Enough fire to survive, not enough to destroy everything. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants preferred smaller fires at night because of fire risk or fuel scarcity, but likely it was both. Survival is rarely about a single factor. You bank the embers with ash, a technique passed down through generations. Ash insulates coals, letting them smolder longer. It's a quiet move, almost meditative. You watch the glow dim but remain alive underneath. Covered like this, the fire can last till morning, ready to be revived with a poke and a breath. This small success brings a surprising wave of relief. You relax your shoulders. The night feels doable now. As hours pass, the fire's warmth ebbs and flows. You shift positions, inching closer when cold creeps in, backing away when heat bites too hard. Your body learns the temperature map of the room. Feet here, torso there, hands tucked. Sleep comes in shallow waves, punctuated by half-waking moments when you check the glow of embers without fully opening your eyes. One more light joke drifts by. Forget meditation apps, watching embers is the original mindfulness practice. You become aware of just how much community knowledge exists around fire. Stories, warnings, habits. Don't sleep too close. Don't leave loose straw nearby. Don't trust a fire that looks asleep. These lessons aren't written down, but they're remembered vividly, because forgetting them hurts, or worse. The hearth remains steady now, breathing softly in the dark. You trust it enough to lie down, pulling whatever covers you have closer, feeling the heat on your face even as your back cools. This balance, never perfectly comfortable, never truly unbearable, is the medieval night in its most honest form. You drift, knowing you'll wake again, that the fire will need you, and that you'll give it attention without resentment. This is the quiet partnership that keeps you alive until morning. You reach for your clothing now, not because you're getting ready to leave, but because undressing would be a terrible idea. In a medieval winter, clothes don't come off at night the way modern pajamas do their little fashion parade. They stay on, all of them. The goal isn't looking restful, it's keeping heat from fleeing your body like it's late for an appointment. You adjust layers carefully, because what you wear to sleep can make the difference between rest and relentless shivering. The base layer is linen. It's thin, a little rough, and surprisingly important. Linen sits closest to your skin because it absorbs moisture. Sweat in winter is dangerous. It cools you once you stop moving, so linen helps wick it away. One mainstream historical fact settles here. Linen was commonly used as an undergarment throughout medieval Europe, even by peasants, because it could be washed more frequently than wool. Clean isn't just about hygiene, it's about thermal comfort. Damp fabric and cold air is a bad combination. Over the linen comes wool, and this is where things get serious. Wool traps air in its fibers, holding warmth even when it's slightly damp. It's bulky, itchy, and absolutely essential. You've got a tunic, maybe leggings or hose, and possibly a second wool layer if your household can spare it. You pull the fabric close around your wrists and ankles, reducing gaps where cold sneaks in. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants layered deliberately with insulation in mind or simply wore everything they owned, but functionally the result is the same. Bulk equals warmth. You check for holes. Mending is constant work. A tear is more than a fashion flaw. It's a draft. Cold air finds these weaknesses immediately. You stuff scraps into gaps, tie cords tighter, and fold fabric where needed. Clothes aren't tailored in the modern sense, but they're endlessly adjusted. Custom fit, medieval edition. Head covering matters more than you'd expect. Heat escapes fast from your head, and peasants often slept wearing simple caps or hoods. Linen or wool, sometimes both. You pull one on and instantly feel more contained, more sealed in. One quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some people believed night air entering uncovered ears could cause illness or madness. Not scientifically accurate, but honestly, when your ears go numb, logic starts to feel optional. Your feet get special attention. Cold feet ruin everything. Wool socks, if you have them, or foot wraps tied carefully around each toe. Bare feet on an earthen floor is an invitation for misery. You tuck your feet under straw bedding later, but the layers come first. Joke number 1 appears quietly. Modern people pay a lot of money for thermal wear, and here you are just sleeping in every outfit you own like it's completely normal. You feel stiff and bulky as you settle down, but freedom of movement isn't the priority now. Stillness is. Heat builds when you stop moving, so the clothes need to trap it without cutting off circulation. It's a delicate balance, learned through long winters. Too tight, and your fingers tingle ominously. Too loose, and cold drafts set up camp. Color and dye don't matter tonight, but texture does. Wool inside feels different from wool outside. Coarser cloth goes outward if possible, smoother toward the skin. Peasants may not talk about textile science, but their choices reflect it. Again, historians still argue whether this knowledge was intuitive, inherited, or discovered afresh each generation, but your comfort says it works. You keep a cloak nearby, not worn continuously, but ready. Cloaks are remarkably versatile. Blanket, pillow, windbreak. You might pull it over your shoulders later if the fire dims too much. You might tuck it around your feet. Flexibility is built into medieval clothing because wardrobes are small and needs are large. A small practical ritual finishes this routine. You rub your hands together, breathe into them, then slide them beneath layers to warm before sleep. Once they're warm, you don't let them get cold again. This habit feels almost ceremonial. Cold hands at night can wake you, distract you, pull you out of rest. Prevention is easier than recovery. As you stretch out near the hearth, clothes rustle softly. Fabric against fabric makes its own quiet soundscape. Outside, winter continues its slow work, but inside, your clothing forms a second shelter layered over your skin. House, fire, clothes. Each one backs up the others. Redundancy is survival. Joke number 2 drifts in. Medieval peasants didn't have heated blankets, but they absolutely layered like they were sponsored by laundry. You think briefly about cleanliness, because yes, clothes are worn for days, weeks even. But winter washing means freezing water and stiff fabrics, so hygiene adjusts. Fewer washes, more airing near the fire. Smoke helps deodorize in its own aggressive way. This isn't luxury, it's practicality shaped by cold. As you settle, warmth builds gradually. It's never the instant, enveloping comfort of modern heating, but it's enough. Enough is the standard. Enough to relax your muscles, enough to let your breathing slow, enough to sleep. The clothes don't come off. There's no sharp line between day wear and night wear. There's only what keeps you warm now and what will still be warm when you wake. And layered like this, wrapped in wool and habit and hard-earned knowledge, you give yourself the best chance of greeting the morning with unfrozen fingers. You're not alone in this room, and not just in the human sense. As the night deepens, you become aware of warm bodies shifting and breathing nearby, heavier and louder than people. Livestock. In a medieval peasant household, animals aren't kept at a polite distance during winter. They're brought in, sometimes into the same building, sometimes into an attached byre, because their bodies are incredible heat sources that politely ignore architectural boundaries. One mainstream historical fact settles in comfortably here. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially in colder regions, peasants housed animals like cows, goats, and pigs either under the same roof or directly adjacent to living quarters. These so-called longhouses weren't designed for romance or hygiene. They were designed for thermal efficiency. A cow gives off the heat equivalent of several humans. That's not a metaphor. That's physics doing you a solid. You hear a cow shift its weight, straw rustling, a slow, contented exhale fogging the air. The smell is unmistakable, earthy, alive, and not something you'd describe as fresh. But smell is a small price to pay for warmth. Cold is worse. Cold feels personal, like it's targeting you specifically. The animals don't mind the arrangement much. If anything, they're happier inside, protected from wind and snow. The wall between you might be thin, or there might be no wall at all, just a low barrier. Heat moves freely. You can feel it, even several feet away, a steady, comforting background warmth that doesn't flicker like fire. It's constant, reliable. Historians still argue whether keeping animals indoors significantly reduced winter mortality among peasants, but there's little debate that it made nights more survivable. There's also sound, chewing, snorting, occasional hoof scrapes. At first, it's distracting. Over time, it becomes soothing. Animals settle into patterns, and their calm feeds into yours. Joke number 1 slides in quietly. This is medieval ASMR, and the cow does not care about your subscription preferences. You arrange your sleeping area closer to the animal side when possible. Not too close, animals move unexpectedly, but near enough to catch the warmth. You angle your body so your feet, eternally cold, benefit most. This is strategic sleep positioning, a skill you didn't know you'd ever need, but here you are. There's risk, of course. Animals bring parasites, dirt, and noise. But winter reshuffles priorities. Survival first, comfort maybe later. You've learned how to coexist. Straw is changed frequently. Waste is managed as best as possible. Fires keep air moving upward, smoke drifting out, and taking some of the smell with it. It's imperfect, but it works. A quirky tidbit floats into your half-drowsy mind. Medieval legal records occasionally mention disputes over animal placement inside homes, with neighbors complaining about noise or smell. Imagine modern apartment arguments, but with cows involved. Spoiler alert, warmth usually won the court case. You think about how this shared space shapes social life. Animals are part of the household. They have names. Losing one in winter isn't just financial loss, it's a serious drop in heating capacity. A dead cow in January is a logistical disaster. Feeding them through winter takes careful planning because warm animals must stay alive to keep being warm. It's a closed-loop system powered by hay, patience, and hope. Historians still argue whether peasants viewed animals primarily as tools or as companions. The truth probably sits in the uncomfortable middle. Tonight, you're grateful without overthinking it. Gratitude doesn't require philosophy when your toes are thawing slightly. You listen as one animal settles heavily, the floor vibrating gently. That vibration adds to the sense that the house is alive, breathing, pulsing with shared warmth. You time your breathing with the slow rhythm around you. Winter outside presses in, but inside, this cluster of living bodies pushes back. Joke number 2 makes a soft appearance. Central heating is great, but it never moves reassuringly at 2 a.m. You drift towards sleep, but not deeply. Medieval sleep is segmented. First sleep, then waking, then second sleep. It's common to wake during the night, check the fire, check the animals, adjust layers. When you do, the animals are still there, steady and indifferent, doing their job without complaint. There's also an unspoken trust here. You trust that the cow won't panic. The cow trusts that you'll keep predators out. This shared night binds you in quiet ways. It's not sentimental, but it's real. As hours pass, frost thickens outside, but inside, the animal's warmth keeps the air just above the edge of misery. Your body relaxes enough to fully sleep again. Breath slows, muscles soften. This is as good as it gets in winter, and surprisingly, it's enough. When you wake briefly before dawn, the animals are still breathing, still warm, still alive. That means the night worked. Another quiet success. Another cold night survived. Not alone, but together. You lower yourself into bed now, if bed is the right word. It's less of a discrete object and more of a carefully constructed strategy. Raised slightly off the dirt floor, framed with rough wood if you're lucky, and filled with straw, chaff, or dried leaves, this is where you spend the longest, stillest hours of the night. Sleeping on the ground is colder, everyone knows that. Even a few inches of elevation keeps some of that creeping chill away from your bones. One mainstream historical fact settles in as you adjust your position. Medieval peasants commonly slept on straw-filled mattresses or sacks, often called palliases, which were refilled regularly as the stuffing broke down. Fresh straw is springy and insulating. Old straw flattens, grows dusty, and loses warmth. Maintenance is constant. Comfort is competitive. You burrow in slowly, letting your body heat start the long work of warming the bedding beneath you. This takes time. At first, The straw feels cool and slightly scratchy, poking through cloth in annoying places. But after a while, it yields and softens. You shift an inch at a time, finding that exact spot where your hips and shoulders sink just enough to feel supported without losing heat. You tuck your knees slightly toward your chest. It's instinctual. Curling reduces the surface area exposed to cold air. Even in sleep, your body cooperates with survival. Historians still argue whether this common curled posture influenced joint issues later in life, or if that was more about hard labor. But right now, posture is about preservation, not ergonomics. Blankets are limited. Woolen covers, if you have them, are heavy and vaguely itchy, but gloriously warm. They smell faintly of sheep and smoke, which sounds worse than it is. Familiar smells register as safety. You pull the blanket up to your chin and then higher, because noses freeze faster than dignity disappears. Joke number 1 appears softly. Medieval peasants didn't do nose-breathing exercises for sleep. They just hid their faces under wool and hoped for the best. Your head rests on a sack filled with straw or rags, bent into a lumpy but functional pillow. You rearrange it until the pressure feels tolerable. Perfection isn't the goal. Stillness is. Movement lets cold in. Once you settle, you commit. Sleep comes in waves, not all at once. You drift, wake, drift again. Each time you surface briefly, you perform a checklist without consciously thinking about it. Fingers warm? Fire glowing? Animals quiet? Yes. Good. Back to sleep. There's an awareness here that true deep sleep belongs to warmer seasons. Winter sleep is vigilant. You're resting, but part of you stands watch against cold. This shared understanding runs through medieval households. Nights aren't passive, they're endured. You discover small tricks over time. You keep tomorrow's clothes under the bedding so they're warm when you wake. You lay a cloak crosswise at your feet, the coldest territory. You shift your sleeping direction slightly, turning your back to drafts you've learned the hard way to anticipate. These micro-adjustments matter. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. Some medieval medical texts suggested sleeping with one's head toward the east for health, aligning the body with cosmic forces. Whether that helped or not, you mostly align yourself with the warmest airflow from the fire. Astral health can wait until spring. Your breathing slows, fogging the air under the blanket, creating a tiny pocket of warmth. It's humid, slightly stale, and deeply comforting. Outside, wind rattles the walls, but it feels distant now, like a story happening to someone else. This is the payoff for everything you've done so far. Layers, fire, animals, walls. Joke number 2 slips in lazily. Memory foam mattresses claim to adapt to you, but straw has been doing that for centuries without a warranty. At some point, you wake fully enough to turn onto your other side. The straw rustles, sounding louder in the quiet night. You freeze, listening. No reaction from anyone else. Safe. You settle again, knowing that if you move too often, you lose accumulated warmth. Sleep becomes a negotiation between comfort and conservation. Historians still argue whether medieval people slept longer overall because nights were longer, or whether segmented sleep prevented deep rest. You suspect the answer is it depends, and tonight it depends on how warm your feet feel. Right now, they're tolerable. That's a win. Near the center of the night, when the fire dips lowest, you wake and pull the blanket tighter. You consider getting up to tend the embers, but decide the animals are still warm and the house hasn't crossed into true misery. Risk assessment in its purest form. Stay warm by moving, or stay warm by staying still. You choose stillness. Slowly, gradually, sleep takes you more deeply. Muscles relax. Jaw unclenches. Thoughts soften around the edges. The bed holds you, imperfect but sufficient. Straw compresses under your weight, forming a shallow nest shaped exactly like you. No one else could use it the same way. It's personal in the least luxurious sense. By the time dawn creeps near, pale and uncertain, your body has done what it needed to do. It has rested enough, stayed warm enough, endured enough. And when you finally stir again, stiff but alive, you realize that the bed, simple, scratchy, and stubborn, did its job. You don't think of food as dinner anymore. Not at night, not in winter. You think of it as fuel. Slow, steady fuel meant to burn quietly while you sleep. What you eat before nightfall determines how well your body can hold warmth once the fire dims and the cold settles in. Hunger isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. A hungry body loses heat faster, and medieval peasants know this without knowing the science behind it. One mainstream historical fact hums quietly in the background here. Medieval peasant diets in winter relied heavily on carbohydrates and fats, bread, porridge, beans, cheese, and ale, because they were filling, calorie-dense, and stored well in cold months. Meat was rare on ordinary days, but fat in any form was precious. Fat burns long. Fat keeps you alive. Earlier, before darkness fully took over, you ate your main meal. Thick bread made from rye or barley, dense enough to double as construction material. It sits heavy in your stomach now, doing exactly what you want it to do, working slowly, generating warmth from the inside. You weren't aiming for culinary joy. You were aiming for endurance. You sip ale or watered beer, not wine, not spirits. Ale is safer than water and carries extra calories. It's weak enough to drink daily, warm enough to be comforting, and just caloric enough to help. Historians still argue how intoxicating medieval ale really was, but tonight it's less about buzz and more about body heat. Joke number one drifts in gently. Hydration culture existed, it just tasted like bread-flavored optimism. Cheese plays its part too. Hard cheese, aged and sharp, stores through winter and delivers concentrated calories. You don't eat much, but even a small piece makes a difference. Protein sustains muscles, fat cushions the cold. Every bite is strategic. You notice how different winter meals feel compared to summer. There's no lightness, no freshness. Everything is heavy, starchy, repetitive. And that repetition is comforting. Predictable meals mean predictable nights. Your body knows what's coming, how long it will last, how it feels afterward. This rhythm keeps panic away. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some medieval households believed eating onions or garlic before bed helped ward off cold and sickness. Modern science would gently say, maybe, but when winter sickness looms and options are limited, belief itself adds warmth. You chew and swallow, feeling the slight burn linger pleasantly. After eating, there's a moment when warmth blooms. Not dramatic, but noticeable. Digestion generates heat, and you bask in it briefly, sitting close to the fire, hands extended. Timing matters. Eat too early, and the effect fades before midnight. Eat too late, and sleep suffers. Peasants learned this balance season by season. You don't snack overnight. Food is precious, and eating in the dark by firelight risks spills, waste, and waking too fully. Better to let the body work quietly. You trust it to do its job. Your stomach now feels full but not strained. That heaviness anchors you. It makes lying still easier. Cold nights are longer when you're restless. Food helps stillness. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants experienced seasonal weight gain in winter or whether scarcity canceled it out. From your perspective tonight, you just feel fortunate not to be hungry. Hunger sharpens cold into pain. You remember winters when stores ran low, when bread was rationed thinner, ale weaker. Those nights were worse, colder, harder to sleep. Tonight isn't like that, and gratitude settles in quietly. As the hours pass, digestion slows, but warmth lingers. You curl under your blanket, letting that internal heat combine with fire, animals, layers, and walls. It's teamwork. Joke number 2 sneaks in softly. Modern people talk about eating for comfort, but medieval peasants ate for survival and accidentally invented the concept. Near midnight, you half wake and feel a faint chill. The warmth from food has faded a little, but not fully. Enough remains to keep you from shivering, enough to let you drift again. Food also affects dreams. Full stomachs lead to heavier sleep, vivid imagery, slower movements. Medieval people noticed this too. Some believed winter dreams were messages from the body or warnings from God. You mostly believe they're messages from bread. Every sack of grain in storage represents future nights like this, warm, endurable nights. Lost grain isn't an inconvenience, it's lost warmth weeks from now. That knowledge shapes how carefully food is handled, measured, respected. Joke number 3 makes its quiet appearance. You don't eat to treat yourself in winter, you eat to negotiate with hypothermia. Eventually, the night deepens. Your body finishes its slow work, releasing the last of that stored warmth. But by now, sleep has settled into you more firmly. The window of vulnerability has passed. Inside your layered shelter, house, fire, animals, bed, clothing, and food, you rest, knowing that tonight, hunger won't be the thing that wakes you. You don't fall into night unprepared. Long before you lie down, your body starts a routine shaped entirely around winter survival. Nighttime isn't a pause in work, it's a shift change. The chores don't disappear when the sun goes down, they just get quieter, slower, and far more important if you want to wake up intact. One mainstream historical fact anchors daily life around daylight, but winter nights still included essential tasks: fire tending, animal checking, tool securing, because neglecting them could mean frozen water, dead livestock, or a house full of cold by morning. These weren't optional habits, they were defensive measures against the hours ahead. Before sleep truly begins, you make a slow circuit of the room. You check doors and shutters. A loose plank or open gap can funnel icy wind straight inside. You press straw, cloth, or old sacks into cracks. It feels like overkill, but cold finds the smallest weakness. Historians still argue whether peasants exaggerated fears of drafts, but given how quickly heat vanishes, the caution makes sense. You glance at the tools stacked near the wall. Metal contracts in cold. Wood splits. Anything left exposed overnight risks damage. A cracked handle can mean lost productivity tomorrow, which snowballs quickly in winter. You move what you can closer to the hearth. Not close enough to burn, but close enough to stay dry and pliable. Animals get the last check. You listen more than you look. Breathing steady? No panicked movement? Good. Calm animals sleep warmly. You toss fresh straw if needed, giving them a softer place to settle. Their comfort loops back to yours. This interconnectedness runs through every winter night, even if no one says it out loud. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some medieval households hung tools or charms near doors at night to ward off bad luck and winter spirits. Protection wasn't just physical, it was psychological. When nights are long and imagination fills the dark, rituals help quiet the mind. You tend the fire one final time. This is deliberate, slow work. You don't add too much fuel, just enough to hold embers past midnight. Ashes smoothed, coals arranged, thicker pieces placed where they'll smolder. You memorize the glow, so you'll know later if something's wrong. Joke number 1 slips in gently. This is less ghost checking the house and more fireplace parent inspecting bedtime conditions. Water is another concern. Buckets brought in earlier are positioned near, but not too near the fire to prevent freezing. Frozen water in the morning delays everything. You dip a finger in, feeling the chill, and nod. Acceptable. Only after all this do you allow yourself to slow fully. You don't rush into bed. Rushing leads to forgetting, and forgetting has consequences. Winter nights punish carelessness more than exhaustion. Sleep comes in layers, broken by brief awakenings. This isn't insomnia, it's vigilance. You come up to the surface of sleep naturally, checking warmth without opening your eyes. Is the fire still faintly warm? Yes. Are you shivering? No. Good. Down you go again. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep pattern was universal or just common in certain regions. But winter makes it nearly inevitable. Cold nudges you awake. Habit carries you back under. At some point, you shift, and a memory slips in. Someone once skipped these routines because they were too tired. The fire died completely. Relighting it took hours, fingers numb, breath sharp. You don't make that mistake. Memory is the teacher here. You wake again near midnight. This time, the chill is more noticeable. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb too much stored warmth. You reach out and poke the embers. They respond reluctantly, but they're alive. You add one small piece of fuel, then wait, watching closely. Fire teaches patience. Joke number 2 makes a soft appearance of checking the fridge at night, except the fridge might kill you if ignored. You lie back down once the glow steadies. The room shifts back into quiet. Breathing slows again. These repeated moments might sound exhausting, but they're familiar. Predictability reduces stress. Knowing you'll wake, check, and return to sleep removes anxiety. You're not fighting the night, you're pacing alongside it. Toward the deepest part of night, when the cold peaks just before dawn, you make the last small adjustment. You pull the blanket tighter, turn your body a few degrees, tuck feet inward. These almost unconscious movements are guided by years of trial and error. A third gentle joke slides in. Fitness trackers would have a very confused time categorizing this much strategic rolling. By now, the routine holds you. You're tired, but not panicked. Cold exists, but it's contained. The night passes not because you beat it, but because you managed it step by quiet step. When you next wake, the sky outside the shuttered opening has shifted slightly, a pale hint of morning pressing through darkness. Your routines worked, again. And that, more than comfort or rest, is what lets you rise and face another winter day. As the night deepens and the cold presses hardest, your thoughts drift toward things you can't see but can definitely feel. Winter has a way of sharpening belief. When your body is quiet, your imagination fills the silence. And in medieval life, that silence is rarely empty. It hums with old stories, warnings, and whispered explanations for why the cold feels so personal. One mainstream historical fact settles gently here. Medieval peasants commonly held folk beliefs that linked cold, illness, and misfortune to spiritual forces, demons, wandering souls, or seasonal spirits, especially during winter when death rates rose and explanations were scarce. You don't separate the physical from the mystical as neatly as modern minds like to. The cold isn't just weather, it has intent. You lie under your blankets and remember the small rituals performed almost without thinking. A marking over the door, maybe a simple cross scratched into wood. Not flashy, just enough to signal protection. Some people hang iron objects near beds, believing iron repels harmful spirits. Others tuck herbs into bedding, sage, rosemary, or thyme, not only for smell, but for safety. A quirky tidbit flutters through your thoughts. Archaeological finds suggest people sometimes stitched protective charms directly into clothing seams. Cold air couldn't see them, but spirits might. You breathe slowly, comforted by routine. Whether or not these practices work in a measurable way almost doesn't matter. They reduce fear, and fear drains warmth faster than wind. Historians still argue whether folk beliefs increased psychological resilience during harsh winters or simply added another layer of anxiety. Tonight, for you, they calm the mind. Sounds seem louder now. A shift of straw, a gust against the wall, the fire's soft hiss. Each one could be nothing, or something. Stories fill in the gaps. Winter spirits that steal breath. Night hags that sit on chests. These are the frameworks people use when sleep feels heavy and air feels tight. Modern sleep paralysis explains this. Medieval people didn't need explanations. They had narratives. Joke number 1 slides in gently. When there's no streetlight, no phone, and no central heating, your imagination absolutely takes the lead meeting. You adjust your blanket, tucking it close, performing small protective gestures without fully waking. Thumb brushing fabric, foot touching familiar wood. Superstitions work best when they're automatic. Conscious doubt weakens them. Outside, the world feels farther away at night. Snow absorbs sound. Wind carries whispers. You understand why winter produces more legends than summer. The environment does half the storytelling on its own. You remember elders explaining that whistling indoors at night invites trouble, or that letting the fire die completely angers protective spirits. Whether that's true or not, maintaining the fire is sensible. Belief aligns nicely with practicality here. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or localized, passed down orally and shaped by region. What matters is that you know them. They frame the night in a way that gives meaning to endurance. As sleep pulls you deeper, dreams form easily. Winter dreams are heavier, slower, and oddly repetitive. You dream of walking through snow that never ends, of fires that dim but don't go out. Dreams blend fear and reassurance in equal measure. You wake briefly, heart slow but alert, convinced something disturbed you. It didn't. The house is steady, animals breathe. Fire glows faintly. Relief passes through you like warmth. You settle again. Another belief drifts up. Sleeping with your head covered protects thoughts from wandering spirits. Nose freezing aside, you comply. Blanket edges shift. Darkness deepens. Inside the cocoon, your mind quiets. Joke number 2 appears quietly. Modern people pay for weighted blankets to feel safe. Medieval peasants used belief, wool, and optimism. Some superstitions focus on time. Certain hours are considered more dangerous than others. Midnight, the deep hours before dawn. These beliefs mirror reality. Those hours are colder, harder, more likely to bring frostbite or death. Spirits become metaphors for environmental risk. You notice how these stories give structure to fear. Instead of an omnipresent danger, cold becomes something with rules. Defense becomes possible. Do the ritual. Say the prayer. Keep the fire. Stay covered. That sense of agency matters. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly feared these spirits or treated them more like stories you half believe but still respect. You suspect it's both. You don't fully believe, but you don't fully dismiss either. Winter punishes arrogance. As the hours stretch, imagination fades into sleep again. The mind tires itself out. Belief softens into habit. Symbols lose sharp edges. Joke number 3 drifts lazily through your thoughts. If monsters really lurk in winter, they're clearly afraid of wool socks and warm bread. When dawn approaches, the power of superstition weakens. Daylight dissolves fears. Spirits retreat, stories shrink, and the practical world takes over again. Cold becomes cold, not curse. For now, though, wrapped in belief as much as fabric, you sleep, protected by stories, routines, and the collective wisdom of generations who endured the same long nights. The wind whistles across the frozen fields outside, rattling the shutters and making the small wooden walls of your home shiver along with it. You press closer to the hearth, grateful for even the smallest heat it emits, feeling the sharp contrast between the fire's warmth and the biting chill creeping in from every other corner of your hut. In these longest, coldest nights, warmth becomes a sort of treasure, hoarded and measured, a thing as valuable as the bread you ration or the woolen blankets you layer upon yourself. You notice the way your breath curls in the frosty air, forming tiny clouds that drift upward before vanishing, and it makes you marvel at the simple physical beauty of cold. You also shiver, but that's part of it, part of the ritual of survival that your ancestors knew too well. Historically, medieval peasants relied on incredibly humble heating methods. A central hearth served as the heart of the home, and families would cluster around it, huddled in layers of wool, linen, or fur. You might stretch your legs near the embers, feeling the occasional spark of warmth graze your skin. And consider that some households even had what they called a smoke canopy, a hood over the fire designed to let smoke escape while concentrating heat where it was most needed. Scholars still argue whether this was more effective than simply allowing the smoke to fill the room, creating a sort of smoky sauna effect that many seem to have tolerated rather than avoided. You notice the smell of the burning wood, a mix of earthy pine and the faint acrid tang of the fire, and it reminds you to inspect the fuel pile. Stored wood had to be dry enough to burn efficiently, which often meant stacking it months in advance under careful cover to keep the moisture at bay. The odd thing is, some peasants use straw not just for bedding, but also as a fuel supplement. When dry, straw would smolder slowly, giving off heat, though it produced so much smoke that you could barely see your hand in front of your face. You might grimace at that and imagine coughing through the haze, yet some historians suggest it was a common practice in poorer households. Smoke had the added benefit of keeping vermin and insects at bay, so there was an accidental ingenuity in it, an understanding of dual-purpose utility that feels clever even today. Layering yourself in garments is the next step, of course. You pull on a thick woolen tunic over your linen shirt, feeling the scratch of the fibers against your skin. And maybe you chuckle a little, because fashion was not exactly a priority when frostbite threatened your fingers. Some peasants would even stuff old rags or straw between layers for added insulation, a practice historians still debate in terms of actual effectiveness. One quirky survival tactic you might find intriguing is the medieval use of animal hides with the fur left on. Not just as blankets, but sometimes as makeshift clothing or bedding. They provided extra warmth because they trapped air alongside their natural fibers. You can almost picture a family sprawled out, swaddled in every piece of fabric they could muster, looking more like a heap of haphazardly draped textiles than anything resembling neat bedding. But it worked. You glance toward the corners of the room, remembering the placement of your storage baskets. In some homes, food storage doubled as passive heat sources. Barrels of root vegetables, grains, and dried beans, if packed closely together, would release slight warmth through fermentation or the simple thermal mass effect, keeping the immediate area marginally less icy. Peasants often slept near these, not because it smelled particularly delightful, but because it was another measure against the cold. Some historians still argue whether this strategy was deliberate or merely a happy accident of practicality, but either way, it speaks to an instinctive understanding of resourcefulness. Feet are particularly vulnerable in these frigid nights. You tug on woolen socks, noticing their coarse texture against your skin, and consider adding another pair if the chill is stubborn. Historically, people sometimes wrapped their feet in straw or even used small pouches of dried leaves as insulators. You might grimace at the imagined crunch underfoot, but also feel a certain admiration for the ingenuity. There's a quirkier record of using leftover animal intestines as makeshift boots. It sounds horrifying at first, but when dried and softened, these provided a surprisingly effective barrier against moisture and wind. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or limited to desperate households, but the fact that they exist in the record tells you something about human inventiveness in extreme conditions. Your hands, now red from the cold, find their way to a small bowl of warm water, or maybe just a handful of heated stones you cradle to restore circulation. You remember that sometimes peasants would preheat stones in the hearth, wrap them in cloth, and use them as portable warmth during sleep. It's a simple concept, yet one that you can almost feel as you imagine pressing the stones against your chest. It strikes you how much effort went into small comforts that today seem trivial, because nothing trivial existed when survival was the objective. Outside, the wind continues its relentless howl. You can hear the icicles forming along the eaves, tapping rhythmically against one another, a percussion line to accompany your quiet contemplation. Medieval peasants often faced storms that could last days, sometimes weeks, and they had to ration not just warmth, but movement. Overexertion could be fatal, as sweating in freezing conditions often led to deadly chills once you stopped. You probably won't survive a day if you wander recklessly through this frost, but huddled in your hut with the strategies we've outlined, you're managing the best any human could. By now, your body has absorbed the layered warmth, your breath no longer rising in jagged clouds, but settling into a gentle rhythm. You recall that some families would even share a single bed, not out of romance, but necessity, creating a human barrier against the cold. Anthropologists still debate whether this close sleeping contributed more to social bonding or simply kept toes from falling off, but either way, you feel a connection across centuries. People then, much like you now, understood the luxury of small warmth, the deep, satisfying sigh that comes from merely surviving another bitter night. As the fire crackles, you can picture the shadows dancing along the walls, the faint glimmer of frost creeping across the small window panes. There's a quiet poetry in this daily endurance, in the endless ritual of preparing for night. Each action, each layer of clothing, each carefully placed stone is a brushstroke in the long, ongoing artwork of human survival. Even the smallest innovations, straw under feet, smoky canopies, fermented root storage, speak of a life lived intimately with the elements. And you, observing and embodying these strategies, are now part of that continuum, feeling the cold not as a stranger, but as a familiar companion. Sleep begins to tug at the edges of your consciousness, a soft, insistent pull. But before surrendering, you glance once more at the fire, at your bundle of blankets, at the frost-kissed window. You understand now that surviving the coldest nights wasn't about grand heroics or dramatic tales. It was about patience, resourcefulness, and a touch of stubborn human ingenuity. And as your eyes grow heavier, the wind outside becomes nothing more than a gentle lullaby, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, warmth and comfort can be found in the smallest, most deliberate acts. You feel it seep into your bones, a cozy triumph against the winter night, and for a moment, you smile, knowing that another bitter night has been met and quietly conquered. The night deepens, and the world outside your hut feels like a frozen whisper. You notice how the moonlight, pale and quiet, illuminates frost on the roof and glints off the icy patches that have formed around the village. Stepping closer to the window, or at least letting your gaze linger there, you see the way the cold transforms the landscape into something almost magical, a silvered stillness that would look like a painting if it weren't so keenly alive. You shiver, both from the chill and from the realization that no one is outside wandering these fields tonight. The cold has everyone ensconced in their tiny, heat-harboring shelters. You settle back near your hearth, listening to the occasional snap of ice or wood as the night stretches on, and you remind yourself that in medieval times, this same moonlight guided countless peasants, trudging home with arms full of firewood or buckets of frozen water, doing their best to survive. Historically, medieval peasants employed small architectural tricks to keep the cold at bay. Windows were tiny, not just because glass was expensive, but because a smaller opening reduced heat loss. You imagine the thin panes, maybe covered with oiled parchment or translucent horn, allowing light but barely any warmth to escape. Historians still argue whether these window coverings were primarily practical or partially decorative. A bit of both, really, given human nature. You probably won't survive this night without a similar barrier, you think with a half smile, noting how little has changed in our instinct to trap warmth and keep out drafts. The walls of your hut, made from wattle and daub, or roughly hewn timber, creak under the pressure of frost and wind. You notice that some families would add extra straw or mud to gaps, a form of primitive insulation that was surprisingly effective. It's almost charming, this makeshift patchwork of survival, like nature and human ingenuity conspiring together. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, peasants stuffed moss or even animal hair into wall crevices. It seems odd at first, but moss has natural insulating properties, and the hair, when compressed, added an extra layer against the wind. You imagine the debates among villagers over whose house was cozier, the friendly rivalry that the cold inspired. Scholars still debate whether these insulating methods were more the result of trial and error ingenuity or passed down communal knowledge. You glance at the floor, noting the layers of straw and rushes that serve as bedding. Sleeping on the bare earth would have been nearly suicidal in these temperatures. Those rushes, trampled and dried, create a surprisingly effective barrier against the cold creeping from the ground. You might laugh softly, realizing that you've been spoiled by modern carpets, yet there's a satisfaction in the tactile simplicity of this setup. Sometimes, families would sprinkle additional herbs among the rushes, thyme or lavender, not just for scent, but because they believed these herbs had minor warming properties, or at least a comforting presence. Quirky but charming, and you imagine lying down on such a fragrant bed after a long day of tending animals or chopping wood. Speaking of animals, you probably aren't alone tonight. Many medieval peasants shared their homes with livestock, particularly smaller animals like pigs, chickens, or even a goat. They weren't pets in the modern sense, they were living heaters. A pig huddled in a corner could raise the ambient temperature by a surprising degree. And historians still argue whether the closeness of humans and animals indoors significantly reduced winter mortality rates. You imagine the occasional snort or cluck punctuating the quiet, a comforting symphony of survival. And you might wrinkle your nose, realizing that the smell could be potent, but the warmth was worth it. Food storage takes on a heightened importance as the night stretches on. Root vegetables, grains, dried beans, and salted meats are carefully arranged in barrels or baskets, their placement strategic for both access and minor heat retention. You notice that some households would keep a small portion of the day's bread near the hearth, not just to slightly warm it before consumption, but also to maintain a modest heat source that radiated slowly. Oddly, some peasants used fermented food, think sour cabbage or ale, as a source of warmth, if not directly, then indirectly through gentle metabolic heat during digestion. Scholars still argue whether this was an intentional practice or simply a fortunate side effect of daily sustenance. You tug at your woolen tunic again, noticing how the fibers trap air close to your body, effectively creating a personal microclimate. Layering was more than common sense, it was survival art. Linen shirts, woolen vests, fur-lined coats, and sometimes even padded garments made from leftover textiles combined to form insulation against the merciless night. There's a quirky historical footnote that some peasants would stuff clothing with dried grasses or feathers, a makeshift approach to what we might call a medieval sleeping bag. You probably won't survive the night without multiple layers, but it's oddly satisfying to observe the ingenuity at work, imagining your ancestors puffed up like feathery little humanoids in their patchwork armor against the cold. Your hands, already familiar with the chill, seek warmth in small rituals. Perhaps you rub them together or cradle a heated stone, a tiny ritual repeated by countless generations. Historians still argue whether these methods, simple as they seem, actually contributed significantly to survival or were more psychological comforts. You feel the slow return of circulation, the gentle easing of cold fingers, and you appreciate the patience and mindfulness that these small tasks require. There's almost a meditative quality to it, the act of caring for oneself in a world that seems intent on testing your endurance. Outside, the wind continues its ghostly lament, but inside, the warmth is steady, layered in fabrics, bodies, and habit. You notice how every object in the room, from the hearth to the straw bedding, plays a part in this delicate ecosystem of survival. You recall stories of villagers sharing not just warmth, but knowledge, tips on layering, feeding animals for heat, and even the occasional advice about strategic movement in the home to avoid drafts. This communal sharing is a quiet, almost invisible form of social infrastructure that feels as vital as the fire burning in the center of the room. Finally, your mind drifts to the quiet hope that this night, like all others, will end with the rising sun. You consider that medieval peasants, despite the harshness, found ways to make winter nights not only survivable, but almost comforting in their rituals. Huddled in layers, accompanied by the subtle chorus of animals, and fortified by simple architecture and clever domestic strategies, they faced the cold with resilience and a certain understated pride. You let your eyes close briefly, imagining the frozen world outside still untouched by your sleep, and you feel an odd kinship with those long-ago souls, enduring, adapting, and finding solace in the tiniest measures of warmth. You shift slightly on your bundle of blankets, feeling the subtle give of straw beneath you and the faint warmth of the stones tucked near your chest. The cold outside continues its unrelenting symphony, whistling through the cracks of the hut and rattling the thin shutters. You draw your knees closer, sensing how every inch of body heat matters tonight. There's a rhythm to these long winter nights, a slow cadence of movement and stillness that the medieval peasants knew well. Each action is deliberate, tending the fire, adjusting layers, checking animals, and yet it carries a quiet poetry. You probably won't survive without being mindful, but this mindfulness becomes almost meditative, the steady pulse of survival, as natural as breathing. Historically, sleep arrangements in peasant households were highly strategic. Families often shared one large bed, layered with straw, furs, and old quilts. The proximity of bodies not only conserved heat, but reinforced social bonds. You imagine curling into this human warmth, limbs tangling and untangling, feeling the shared pulse of life all around you. Scholars still argue whether such sleeping arrangements were primarily functional or if they also fostered communal intimacy. But either way, the effect is obvious. Warmth multiplies when people huddle together. The thought of modern solitary beds seems almost luxurious in comparison, but perhaps less effective for surviving a night like this. You notice the faint aroma of dried herbs tucked into the corners of the hut. Lavender, sage, or thyme were commonly used, not only for scent, but because peasants believed they had subtle warming or protective properties. Some historians suggest the effect was more psychological than physical, a placebo of comfort, that nonetheless contributed to resilience. You tuck a few strands under your pillow in your imagination, feeling the layers of scent and warmth combine. There's a quirky historical anecdote that some families would sprinkle crushed juniper berries or even dried nettles in their bedding to deter vermin. It sounds uncomfortable, but you can't help but admire the practicality masked as superstition. The hearth flickers, casting dancing shadows on the wattle and daub walls. You watch the flames play, noticing the faint cracks of embers as they settle into ash. Fuel management was crucial, wood was precious, and the fire could never be allowed to die out completely. Peasants sometimes added dried dung or compressed peat as alternative fuel sources, particularly in northern regions where timber was scarce. You wrinkle your nose at the thought, but the ingenuity is undeniable. Historians still argue whether these fuels were supplementary or primary, but the result is the same: warmth sustained against the unforgiven cold. Your attention drifts to your hands, warming them with repeated gestures, and you remember the small innovations people devised to survive the night. Footwear, for instance, was layered with wool, fur, or straw, sometimes even soaked in tallow to resist frostbite. Hands could be warmed by a simple hand warmer strategy: small cloth pouches filled with heated stones or embers, wrapped carefully to avoid burns. You chuckle quietly, imagining medieval parents scolding children for dropping their little warmth bags into the fire or onto the floor. There's something comforting in knowing that human error and improvisation were constants across the centuries. You glance at your animal companions, huddled in the corner or near the hearth, and realize their value extends beyond simple heat. Chickens, pigs, and goats contributed to a microclimate within the hut, their body warmth radiating outward. Medieval peasants knew this instinctively, positioning livestock strategically, often on slightly raised platforms, to protect both animals and people from damp floors. Some scholars argue that this symbiosis also reduced mortality from exposure, while others suggest it increased disease transmission. Either way, it's a delicate balance that speaks to centuries of trial and error adaptation. The ritual of tending the fire continues, a slow meditation. You notice how the smoke fills the room in gentle wisps, not choking you, but forming a haze that keeps insects away. Historically, some households preferred smoke-heavy rooms because they found it comforting, even protective. You probably won't survive without respecting this ritual. The fire is your life. Adding wood requires subtle judgment. Too much at once could suffocate the embers, too little and the warmth dwindles. You imagine the hum of medieval hearth life, quiet chatter, the occasional crackle of timber, and the rhythmic breathing of a household all working together to endure the cold. Your gaze drifts to the walls again, recalling the various insulation strategies employed by peasants. Extra straw, moss, or even old rags were stuffed into cracks, while thick tapestries or blankets might hang inside to trap heat. There's a certain elegance in this bricolage, an improvisational art born purely of necessity. Quirky accounts exist of people layering discarded clothing along ceilings or loft beams, creating warm thermal pockets overhead. Scholars still debate the efficiency of these methods, but there's no denying the creativity and resourcefulness they reflect. You consider food knowing that metabolism itself produces warmth. A small, slow meal of broth or porridge near the hearth is more than sustenance. It is heat, comfort, and morale all at once. You remember that medieval households often kept a pot of gruel simmering on the fire, its gentle steam filling the room. Oddly, some families even added small amounts of alcohol to preserve the heat longer, not necessarily for intoxication, but because the slight fermentation contributed warmth and energy. Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice, but it highlights the inventive ways people merged practicality with the tools at hand. You shift slightly again, noting the quiet satisfaction that comes from preparing thoroughly for a long night. The simple routines, layering clothing, stoking the fire, checking animals, adjusting bedding, are not burdens but comforting rituals. You recognize the rhythm of survival, the way the cold imposes structure and discipline on human behavior. There's a subtle, almost meditative quality to this awareness. You probably won't survive long without attention to detail, but your mindfulness transforms routine into serenity. Outside, the wind taps its icy fingers against the roof, but you feel cocooned. Layers of straw, wool, and body heat form a protective barrier, while the fire's gentle glow animates the shadows around you. Even the quirkiest historical practices, stuffing moss in walls, sharing bedding with livestock, heating stones for hands, contribute to this invisible web of warmth and security. Scholars still debate the efficacy of some methods, but you know the principle. Adaptation, resourcefulness, and patience are your most powerful allies tonight. As sleep begins to creep toward the edges of your consciousness, you appreciate the subtle interweaving of human ingenuity and natural rhythm. The same strategies that kept medieval peasants alive now inform your own experience. Layering, strategic warmth, shared human and animal heat, and the soothing repetition of small tasks. You feel a connection across centuries, a quiet companionship with those who endured nights just as long, winds just as biting, and darkness just as profound. The cold outside is no longer an adversary, but a backdrop against which the quiet drama of survival unfolds. And so you settle further into the warmth you've cultivated. Every small act of preparation and care magnified in significance. The fire crackles softly, your breath slows, and your muscles finally relax. You understand now that surviving the night is not a heroic feat, but a careful choreography of environment, body, and instinct. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you feel a soft, abiding sense of satisfaction. The cold is held at bay, life continues, and the rhythm of winter night persists gently, predictably, beautifully. The first hours of night have passed, and you feel the deep, slow settling that comes with endurance. The wind outside continues its whispered lament, brushing against the roof and shivering through the gaps in the walls. You curl a little closer to the hearth, where embers glow softly, radiating warmth like the heartbeat of the hut itself. The frozen landscape beyond the small window pane looks almost serene now, a silent silver world untouched by human activity. You probably won't survive without this careful cocoon of preparation, yet the very act of tending it, layering, stacking, stoking, arranging, creates a meditative rhythm that eases your mind, even as it guards your body. Historically, peasants often relied on subtle microclimates within their homes to survive the coldest nights. Hearths were centrally located not just for cooking, but to maximize radiating warmth throughout the room. You imagine the careful placement of furniture and bedding to make the most of these thermal patterns, a practice that seems simple yet reflects a profound understanding of heat distribution. Scholars still argue whether these practices arose purely from necessity or through centuries of passed-down experimentation. But the effectiveness is evident in the historical record. Your eyes drift to the bedding once more. Straw, rushes, and furs are layered meticulously, a patchwork quilt of survival. You notice how the layers trap small pockets of air, acting as insulation that keeps the chill of the floor at bay. Some peasants even placed heated stones beneath the bedding to warm their feet through the night, a technique that seems almost magical until you remember the physics, radiant heat and conduction working together. Quirky records suggest that in northern villages, people sometimes buried a handful of glowing coals under clay tiles in sleeping areas, creating a primitive form of radiant floor heating. You shiver at the thought of accidentally touching a hot tile, but admire the ingenuity. Animals remain your silent companions. The pigs and goats huddle close, occasionally shifting, sending small waves of warmth across the room. Their presence is more than comfort. It's a calculated survival tactic. Livestock indoors increase the ambient temperature just enough to make the difference between discomfort and dangerous hypothermia. You probably won't survive the night without such allies, and their uncomplaining cooperation is a subtle reminder of the interdependence of life in this era. Historians still debate whether close proximity to animals indoors increased disease risk more than it improved survival, but either way, the practice was widespread enough to indicate its value. You consider clothing layers again, noticing how even small adjustments, tucking a tunic here, folding a sleeve there, affect the way heat is retained. Wool, linen, and fur, combined with ingenuity, create a surprisingly effective defense against the frost. Quirky historical sources mention stuffing garments with straw or feathers to increase insulation, a bit like turning oneself into a human pillow. Scholars still argue whether these extreme measures were common or reserved for the most desperate nights, but imagining them now brings a faint smile. Humans will always find clever, if unusual, solutions to discomfort. Food and drink continue to play their subtle role. A small cup of warm broth or ale doesn't just nourish, it creates internal heat, a biological boost against the winter chill. Some peasants preferred fermented foods like sauerkraut or gruel enriched with grains, not just for calories, but for the gentle, steady warmth that digestion produced. You might find this humorous, imagining centuries of people unknowingly creating tiny metabolic fires inside their bodies. Historians still debate whether these internal heating strategies were intentional or simply a fortunate side effect, but their existence points to a nuanced understanding of practical survival. The room around you feels alive in quiet ways. Every crack in the wall, every layer of straw, every ember, and every animal contributes to a microcosm of warmth. You notice how the shadows flicker along the walls as the fire shifts, a slow dance that mesmerizes without startling. The subtle interplay of light and warmth is almost hypnotic, lulling you further into a state of calm vigilance. You probably won't survive if you ignore these small details, yet noticing them provides a sense of mastery over the otherwise hostile environment. Water, frozen outside, reminds you of yet another consideration. Peasants had to ration their daily supply carefully, melting snow or ice over the hearth, sometimes in small quantities to prevent extinguishing the fire. The task itself is slow and deliberate, almost ritualistic, adding another rhythm to the night. Quirky historical accounts mention families saving snow from the roof to melt over stones, creating a rudimentary, passive method of water heating. Scholars still argue whether such techniques were born of ingenuity or sheer necessity, but they underscore the resourcefulness required in these extended cold nights. You tug again at your blankets, feeling the subtle shift of layers beneath you. Every adjustment is part of a constant dance with temperature, a negotiation between comfort and survival. You recall historical anecdotes of families sleeping in near-complete darkness, relying on the warmth of the fire and each other rather than lamps, preserving both heat and fuel. The practice also created a communal sense of closeness, a soft reassurance that no one was facing the night entirely alone. You probably won't survive if you are isolated, and here, in this imagined past, you sense the quiet power of shared endurance. The fire crackles low now, a gentle, almost musical accompaniment to the cold's persistent whisper. You observe how tiny sparks occasionally leap into the air, only to settle quickly into ash, much like fleeting thoughts in the mind of a person lying awake in winter. Peasants often kept these embers alive for hours, carefully managing fuel and airflow, understanding that a dying hearth could mean disaster. Scholars still debate the best methods, and you might chuckle softly imagining medieval families arguing over the perfect wood stacking technique or whether a few extra logs could make the difference between warmth and peril. You feel your body finally succumbing to fatigue, yet the awareness of survival rituals remains embedded in your consciousness. You remember layering strategies, animal placement, insulation, water management, and food as subtle warmth producers. Each measure, though small on its own, weaves together into a comprehensive defense against the cold. Quirky, overlooked details, herbs tucked in bedding, moss in walls, heated stones under feet, create a rich tapestry of survival knowledge that is both practical and surprisingly charming. Outside, the wind continues its quiet chorus, but inside, the hut feels like a tiny sanctuary. You notice the symmetry between centuries-old practices and your present imagination, a recognition that human ingenuity and patience have always been sufficient to meet the harshest nights. Historians still argue over which techniques were most effective, but in your quiet observation, you see that survival was never about a single perfect strategy. It was about the layering of small, deliberate choices. And so, cocooned in layers of warmth, with the soft glow of embers, the gentle chorus of animals, and the ritual of tending every detail, you let yourself drift closer to sleep. The cold outside is formidable, yes, but within this carefully maintained sanctuary, there is comfort, connection, and a slow, satisfying sense of mastery over the environment. Every historical fact, quirky survival tactic, and debated practice becomes a subtle lullaby, a gentle whisper across the centuries, reminding you that human resilience is both ordinary and extraordinary. The hours stretch on, and the world outside your hut feels frozen in timeless stillness. You notice the way the moonlight filters through the small, frost-specked window, casting delicate patterns on the floor that seem almost alive. The wind continues its quiet percussion, rattling the shutters and whistling through gaps in the walls, but inside, a gentle warmth envelops you. You probably won't survive the bitter nights without careful attention, yet you feel a quiet pride in the mastery of simple, deliberate routines, layering garments, tending the hearth, arranging bedding, and sharing warmth with both family and animals. Each action carries the quiet rhythm of survival, a cadence that is almost meditative in its repetition. Historically, peasants often relied on layered insulation strategies beyond clothing and bedding. Walls were reinforced with extra straw, moss, or even discarded textiles, while ceilings sometimes had additional coverings of cloth or rushes. These measures helped to trap heat and reduce drafts. You imagine running your fingers along a wall, feeling the subtle give of straw or moss beneath the plaster, and you can almost sense the centuries of trial and error that produced these practical solutions. Scholars still argue whether these methods were more effective than simply adding extra firewood, but the consistency of their use in records suggests their value was well understood. Your gaze drifts to the fire, where embers glow softly, radiating steady warmth. Maintaining the hearth requires constant vigilance. Too little attention and the fire could die. Too much and you risked wasting precious fuel. You probably won't survive if the fire fails, so every small adjustment matters. Oddly, some medieval households used heated stones or metal plates to store residual heat from the hearth, placing them strategically beneath bedding or near seating areas. This practice seems almost like magic, yet it illustrates the ingenuity of everyday survival. Historians still debate how widespread these methods were, but their existence speaks to human creativity in facing extreme conditions. You notice the subtle chorus of sounds in the room, the occasional rustle of straw, the soft breathing of animals, the crackle of embers. These noises are comforting, marking the rhythm of life even in the coldest nights. Some quirky accounts suggest that peasants would whisper to their animals, believing that a calm human voice could calm livestock and, indirectly, improve the warmth they generated by reducing restlessness. Scholars remain skeptical, but it's a charming notion, and imagining it brings a smile. You probably won't survive without attention to these small details, and even the seemingly trivial acts of care contribute to the larger ecosystem of warmth. Layering continues to play a central role in your survival. You tug at your woolen tunic and adjust blankets, noticing how even minor tweaks improve heat retention. Historically, layering involved not just clothing, but a combination of furs, straw, and linens strategically placed around the body. Some peasants would even add makeshift insulation inside shoes or gloves, stuffing straw or moss for extra protection. You probably won't survive a night of frost without such measures, but they also serve as a fascinating glimpse into the resourcefulness of daily life. Scholars still debate how widely these extreme adaptations were used, but the diversity of methods highlights the creativity of human ingenuity. Food and drink continue to influence the rhythm of the night. A small bowl of warm porridge or broth provides not only nourishment, but gentle internal warmth. Medieval peasants understood this implicitly. The act of eating slowly near the fire produced comfort, morale, and metabolic heat. Some households even included fermented foods, which historians still argue might have had subtle heating benefits through the body's digestive processes. Quirky tales suggest that adding a pinch of ale or wine to certain meals enhanced the effect, though the main benefit was probably psychological as much as physical. You probably won't survive the cold nights without these simple rituals, yet they add a certain charm to the otherwise austere conditions. You glance at your sleeping arrangements again, noticing the intricate layering of rushes, straw, furs, and cloth. This patchwork of warmth is deceptively simple, yet it embodies centuries of experimentation and shared knowledge. Medieval peasants were highly observant, noting which materials retained heat best, how animals' positions influenced microclimates, and how drafts traveled through their homes. Scholars still argue whether these practices were standardized or varied widely by region, but the principles remain remarkably consistent. You probably won't survive without integrating multiple strategies at once, and these layers remind you that survival is often about combining small solutions into a cohesive system. Water management also plays a subtle role. Peasants often had to melt ice or snow for cooking and drinking, carefully doing so over the hearth to preserve fuel and maintain warmth. You imagine the patient process of slowly warming water, noticing its steam curling into the frigid air, adding a faint layer of moisture and heat to the room. Quirky records suggest that some households kept small vessels of water near the fire, allowing ambient warmth to keep it partially liquid, a kind of primitive thermal reservoir. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of these methods, but they illustrate the intricate attention to detail that survival demanded. Your animal companions remain quietly steadfast. Chickens, pigs, goats, or even dogs contribute passive warmth, their bodies radiating heat in subtle waves. Positioning animals correctly is key. Closer to human sleeping areas for warmth, farther from food stores to prevent spoilage. You probably won't survive without these silent collaborators, and imagining the gentle shuffle of their movements or the soft snorts and clucks adds a comforting layer to the night's rhythm. Scholars still debate the balance between the benefits of animal warmth and the risks of disease or odors, but the historical record shows that indoor livestock were common and valued for precisely this reason. Your body responds to these conditions with gradual relaxation. The repeated rituals, layering, feeding, tending fire, adjusting animals, and checking insulation create a subtle, hypnotic rhythm. Each action, though small, reinforces the larger framework of survival. You probably won't survive without this mindfulness, yet the repetitive nature of the tasks transforms necessity into calm, a gentle meditation on endurance. Quirky anecdotes, like tucking herbs in bedding or placing stones under feet, add charm and remind you that human ingenuity often blends practicality with a touch of creativity. Outside, the wind's eerie music continues, but inside, the hut is a carefully orchestrated symphony of warmth and life. The fire crackles in the center, casting soft shadows on walls thickened by straw, moss, and tapestries. You probably won't survive the night without respecting this microclimate, but the combination of heat, human presence, animal warmth, and thoughtful preparation is almost luxurious in its effectiveness. Scholars still debate the relative efficiency of each method, but the cumulative effect is clear. Survival depends on layers, timing, and observation. As you settle more deeply into your cocoon of warmth, you feel the rhythm of the night guiding your consciousness. You notice the subtle pulse of life in every corner, the glow of embers, the rustle of straw, the soft breathing of animals, and the gentle tick of your own heart. Each element contributes to a delicate balance that transforms a hostile environment into a sanctuary. You probably won't survive without these careful calibrations, yet the quiet satisfaction in mastering them is profound. And so, cocooned, layered, and surrounded by the subtle symphony of survival, you drift toward sleep. The long winter night, once formidable, now becomes a canvas for human ingenuity and patience. Every historical fact, quirky survival tactic, and debated practice forms part of the lullaby, a soft whisper across the centuries, reminding you that endurance is woven from the small, deliberate acts of care. You feel the slow, satisfying release of tension, the gentle reassurance that you are safely cocooned against the cold, and the rhythm of the night carries you toward dreamlike rest. The night has deepened into a long, steady quiet. Outside, the wind still sighs across the fields, bending icy branches and rattling shutters. But inside, the hut feels like a small, invincible world. You feel the accumulated warmth of careful preparation, layers of wool, linen, and fur, the heat of the fire, the quiet radiance of animals curled nearby, and the residual glow of heated stones tucked under bedding. You probably won't survive without this orchestration of microclimates, yet the satisfaction of mastering these subtle defenses against the cold creates a gentle sense of calm. Every movement you make, adjusting blankets, turning a stone closer to your feet, nudging the animals for maximum comfort, is part of a deliberate rhythm that has sustained humans for centuries. Historically, medieval peasants faced nights like this with a blend of ingenuity and patience. Sleep was not a solitary, uninterrupted affair. It was punctuated by small actions to maintain warmth and safety. You notice how the straw beneath you muffles sound and isolates the cold from the earth, while layers of furs and blankets trap air in pockets that preserve heat. Some households even employed small overhead lofts or shelves with extra blankets, creating vertical insulation that is surprisingly effective. Scholars still argue whether such lofts were widespread or mostly confined to wealthier peasant households, but the ingenuity is clear. You probably won't survive without attention to these details, Yet imagining them now brings a quiet admiration for human adaptability. Your attention drifts to the fire, where embers glow in soft, steady pulses. Maintaining a fire over hours or even days was an essential skill. Wood had to be carefully selected and stored, with dry pieces used first to ignite the coals and denser timbers added gradually to sustain heat. Oddly, some peasants supplemented wood with peat or dried dung, a practice that may seem unappealing today but was both practical and efficient. Scholars still debate whether such alternative fuels were a matter of necessity or convenience, but the principle is clear. Warmth required both vigilance and creativity. You feel the subtle pulse of life in the hut, noticing how every element contributes to a shared microclimate. Animals provide warmth and quiet companionship, their breathing creating a gentle rhythm that echoes the cadence of your own heart. You probably won't survive without these subtle allies, yet the comfort they offer is undeniable. Some quirky accounts describe villagers whispering to livestock, believing it calmed them and improved their warmth efficiency, a charming mix of superstition and practicality. Historians still argue over the veracity of these anecdotes, but they serve as a reminder of the intimate, interdependent relationships humans cultivated with animals in the past. Food and drink are small, consistent sources of comfort and internal warmth. You imagine a slow, lukewarm broth simmering near the hearth, its gentle steam mingling with the air. Medieval peasants understood the dual role of food, sustenance for the body and subtle heat for the soul. Some households even relied on fermented foods, whose slow metabolic energy release offered an additional, if minor, contribution to staying warm. Scholars still debate whether this was an intentional strategy or simply a convenient byproduct of diet, but it reinforces the principle that survival was about combining multiple small advantages to create a resilient system. Layering continues to be vital. You tug at your woolen tunic, adjust blankets, and notice how each small adjustment improves insulation. Some households added unusual materials, straw in gloves or shoes, extra furs under bedding, or scraps of old textiles in walls. You probably won't survive without such meticulous care, yet these measures also illustrate a quirky creativity that brings a subtle charm to hardship. Scholars still discuss whether these methods were widespread or exceptional, but the principle is universally clear. Layering is survival, and innovation is survival's ally. The room itself has become a gentle sanctuary. Shadows flicker as the fire breathes, and the subtle rustle of straw and animals forms a soothing white noise. You probably won't survive without cultivating this sanctuary, but the meditative quality of attention to small details transforms endurance into calm. Quirky historical practices, heated stones, moss and walls, herbs and bedding blend practicality and charm, showing that survival and comfort are not mutually exclusive. Water management is another quiet, ongoing concern. Melting snow or ice over the hearth requires patience and care, ensuring that warmth is conserved while the essential task is accomplished. Some records describe keeping small vessels of water near the hearth to maintain a gentle ambient temperature, a kind of early thermal management. Scholars still argue how efficient these methods were, but the principle remains instructive. Subtle, small interventions compounded over time yield tangible benefits. You feel a slow surrender to fatigue, yet the knowledge of preparation and survival remains vivid. The layers of warmth, the strategic positioning of animals, the careful tending of the fire, and the subtle rituals of food and water management form a complex ecosystem that has allowed humans to endure the harshest nights. You probably won't survive without this awareness, and the realization is both humbling and comforting. Outside, the wind's eerie song continues, but inside, the hut is a cocoon of layered warmth and deliberate care. Every ember, straw bundle, fur, and breath contributes to a quiet equilibrium that transforms the cold night into a space of safety and rhythm. Scholars still debate the relative effectiveness of individual strategies, but the cumulative effect is undeniable. And now, as your body and mind drift further into slumber, it's time for the wind down. Let your breathing slow, your muscles relax, and your awareness soften. The fire burns gently, the animals breathe softly, and the straw and blankets cradle you like a nest. Outside, the moon moves silently across the sky, casting gentle light through the frost-kissed window. Inside, warmth, routine, and quiet observation have preserved life through the coldest hours. Let your thoughts settle, your mind release its hold, and allow the rhythm of the night to lull you completely. You are safe, enveloped in layers of warmth, comfort, and centuries of human ingenuity. Let the small acts of survival, the fire, the animals, the layering, the steady attention, fade into gentle background hums, like a lullaby that stretches across time. Sleep now, peacefully, knowing the night is met, the cold held at bay, and another morning will come with quiet inevitability. The night has been long, and the cold has pressed against your senses like a persistent whisper. But now, cocooned in your layers of blankets and furs, cradled by the warmth of the hearth, and accompanied by the gentle breathing of animals nearby, you can finally let your body relax. Feel your muscles soften, releasing the tension that has accumulated through the long, vigilant hours. Let your mind drift, noticing only the gentle crackle of embers, the faint rustle of straw, and the soft, rhythmic hum of your breathing. Each element of the hut, the stacked blankets, the heated stones beneath your feet, the cozy layering of garments, is part of a carefully orchestrated cocoon designed to keep you safe, warm, and serene. Outside, the wind may continue its song, but inside, it is muted, distant, and non-threatening. You can imagine the moonlight brushing over the frost outside, a soft silver glow that illuminates without chilling. Your body is attuned to warmth, comfort, and the simple reassurance of survival. The details that once demanded attention, food, fire, water, animals, insulation, now fade into a gentle background rhythm, like a lullaby whispered across the centuries. Even the quirks of medieval ingenuity, the heated stones, moss-filled walls, and herbs tucked into bedding, become part of a slow, soothing narrative of endurance and human creativity. Breathe slowly. Let your awareness soften. Every layer of warmth, every precaution, every deliberate act has contributed to this moment of calm. The night stretches out softly, carrying you toward the edge of sleep. You are safe, cared for, and cocooned in a comforting rhythm that transcends time. Let the hushed whispers of history and the gentle cadence of survival carry you gently into rest. Tonight, you sleep as countless souls have slept before, enveloped in warmth, ingenuity, and quiet, enduring patience. Drift now, and let your dreams be soft, serene, and untroubled. Sweet dreams.